Hello, welcome to the January 27th, 2023 Club Cubase live stream. I'm going to do a quick audio test and then we will begin. Bear with me just for a moment. Okay, all right, so my name is Greg Undo. I'm the host of the live stream, and if you have not attended a Club Cubase live stream before, how it works is you can submit questions in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de. Or you could just simply ask questions in the chat field. When asking questions, if you could specify which level of Cubase you're running, whether it's Cubase LE, AI, Elements, Artist, or Pro, what version number, and also which OS, that information is helpful. I won't be able probably to respond to questions in real time because we'll try to go through each of the questions chronologically as they are asked. So if you don't see an immediate response to your question, please feel free to, if we could try to avoid asking the same question repeatedly, that would be appreciated. That just kind of slows down the whole process. And we should have all the topics that are covered in today's live stream indexed with timestamps, and that will be posted into the comments field of the video that you could use for a later reference. That should be several hours after the live stream. I will take a quick dinner break afterwards, and then I will watch the live stream again and type them all up. And if you wanted to search for topics that have been covered in previous Club Cubase live streams, you could go to cubaseindex.com. And Jan from Stockholm has been kind enough to create that website for us. We want to thank Jazz Dude and Agent K for serving as moderators. They're not Steinberg employees. They just kind of do this to make it a better community. So a special thank you to them for all of their efforts to make it a better community. And also give Jazz Dude recognition for his work with the Cubase Nation Discord, which is a wonderful resource of information. Just a quick note, Tuesday's live stream will be the last live stream of the month on the 31st. And generally the last live stream of the month, what we do is we go do about 2 hours, and then we have like a 2 or 3 hour Zoom social meetup. So if you wanted to actually interact and meet some of the other people in kind of a Zoom format, they're always incredibly enjoyable for me, getting to interact and speak and let other people talk besides myself. And I've arranged for a special guest for Tuesday's Zoom meetup. So Michael Wagner, who's probably one of the most highly regarded rock engineers, hard rock engineers. He was a Nuendo user. He's recently retired. Was a longtime Steinberg user. He's worked with Metallica, Poison, Motley Crue, Skid Row, King's X. I think he did Black Cat by Janet Jackson, White Lion. So that kind of whole era. So Michael will kind of, meet with attendees. So if you wanted to always know how particular records were done, ask him a question about mixing Master of Puppets by Metallica, it's a great opportunity to meet Michael. He's kind of coming out of retirement to do this as a special favor. So again, that will be on Tuesday, and we'll provide the link if you want to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. You could send questions there. And if you want to email me, I'll be happy to send the link, and we'll provide the link in Tuesday's live stream. So with that, let's go ahead and begin. All right, so the first question from Joe K. Can you go over how to handle sample rate changes when going between sessions? Is it safe to change audio events from 44.1 to 48K and vice versa? Can you go over how to update audio events to match? Okay, so let's say I have my project here at 44.1. And we'll play just so you get a little bit of context for the key. So all of my files, when you look at them here, are 44.1, 16-bit. So if we want to change this to 24 to 48K for sample rate, we would just go to our project menu, and let's go to our project setup. Here we'll see our sample rate. I'm going to switch this to 48K and hit OK. And we'll get a little window says, do you want to convert audio files to the new sample rate? We'll say convert. Do you want to keep the source files? So this is basically, do you want to keep the original 44.1K files? We'll say keep. And then when we get this third prompt, and if you have elements in musical mode, it may ask you to render the musical mode elements. But this is kind of a key one. It says, do you want to keep the audio events at their sample positions? Here we're going to choose no. So now we look at the files. The files are going to be 48K when we look at it. And we play back, it's going to be the same pitch as we saw before. So we'll play back. So once again, just come over here and go to the project menu to project setup, change the sample rate, and when it asks you for keeping at the sample position, choose no, and then you can say kind of yes to all of the other elements. So let me know if that's helpful. All right, wonderful to see Ace Amadeus on. So we see, how do I get Cubase 12 Pro to recognize my Yamaha TX802 module? And is it possible to view patch names in Cubase? All right, so let's take a look. We'll go to our studio menu and go to more options, and let's go to our MIDI device manager. So we'll go to install device, and we'll see if there's a TX802 in here. All right, so there's a TX81Z, and I don't think that's the same. I'm pretty sure that you could go to, let's see if there's, let me just see if it's listed under not being a Yamaha one. All right. Now, one source that you could check, I think if you go to Riveted Studios, and there may also be within, you might be able to find something, but I think Cubase patch. And I think if you go to Riveted Studios, there's a bunch on here. All right, and so these are all, so you might want to look here and see if there's, let me just see if there's, so, but you might be able to find the TX802 directly there, Ace. So if not, I'm sure there's one that's kind of floating around the internet, because that was kind of, as people were using TX802s, there was a lot of patch scripts created there. Okay, so we see from InDrop, and then with Ace, going back to the TX802. So once you've defined the TX802, so let's say we go here again to more options, to your MIDI device manager. So you can install a device. We'll define new. And tell what MIDI channels you're using. TX802. And at this point, we could give it a particular MIDI in and out port. And now at this point, you could just, when we go to add a MIDI track, we can just come over here and choose the TX802, and then you could just choose like the MIDI port directly there. And if you see, so that's how you would set it up to communicate with Cubase. Okay, so we have a question. Question: when I convert a stereo file to mono using the pool, it automatically turns on musical mode. Is there a way to prevent that? All right, so let me just come over here. Let's go to just import a stereo file. I'll just come over here. Let's import a file. Okay, so we have our stereo file. So let's go to our pool window. So we'll look at our pool. All right, so musical mode isn't activated. So I'm going to come over here. Let's convert the files, and we'll say the mono. All right, so now that we converted it to mono here, that didn't change it to that didn't enable musical mode. But let's say if I come here also, and let's go to our project, and we'll do convert tracks, and we'll say multi-channel to mono. So I'm going to select the track here. So convert tracks, multi-channel to mono. I'll do on a selected track. All right, so now I see kind of my left and right channels. So let's go back to our pool window, and we see that our split files aren't automatically turned on in musical mode. So it doesn't seem to be activating musical mode by default. Maybe if the file was originally in musical mode. So let's say if I come over here, and if my original file was in musical mode, and then we'll convert again. That even when it's in musical mode, that it's the new file that was converted isn't in musical mode either. So let me know if I did it differently than you did. All right. All right, so we have a question. Can you explain how to use a MIDI remote and map it to control the C3 drawbars in Halion 6? Okay, so let's go ahead and open up Halion 6. Okay, so let's come over here to the Model C. So we'll just say okay, so gonna have all right, so just come over here. Okay, so now we go to our editor, and we'll go to, say, macro. So I have, just as my MIDI remote here, I'm going to just go back, and we'll select, I have my choice OS controller. So if I wanted to come over, and I'll just make my controller again here. And I'll just build up the controller from scratch. All right. So I'm going to just come over here. Let's just add our choice OS. 100, and we're going to select our port here. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and okay, so now I'll go to the mapping assistant here. And let's just assign these to quick controls. So, or to focus quick controls. So I'll just say, okay, this is quick control 1, quick control 2. So I just touch the fader. We make our assignment. Touch control 4. So let's say 5. Seven and 8. All right, so we have these assigned. So now we'll come back over to Hallian. Now let's open up our Hallian. So if I wanted to have these different elements, we could go to kind of the quick control assignment here. And we could say, okay, I'll just click on learn, and then I'll move a drawbar. Let's come here. So I'm going to select, so we'll just move. All right, and we could also just come over here. So we'll move. All right, so let me just see. Okay, so I want this drawbar to be so I see some of them. All right, so I'm just going to remove the quick control assignments here. All right, I'm just going to load up Hallian one more time. Usually you could just assign it directly to yes, it's usually just kind of click on the learn button and then move a parameter, and then that will be assigned. It doesn't seem to be working here. So, but usually what you do is as soon as we adjust kind of our learn button, that you could just assign it to the quick controls. And let's say if I just come over here, we could just and let me just try with another. I'm going to try in Hallian Sonic and see if it behaves the same way. Right, so we come over here, we'll click on edit. All right, so we have our quick controls assigned. So now I want to learn. So some of the quick controls are working kind of as expected, but let's see if we right click on the settings. So we'll just say all right, so let's say if I go to my choice OS controller, and let's say if I don't have it configured here, so usually it will automatically assign learning it, but let's say if I just have this as my controller, and I'm just going to click on Learn CC. Now, if I just right click on the faders and then click to learn on CC, that we could control them. But it seems like that should be able to work through quick control. So I'm not sure if it's maybe fixed for some reason with that. So, but you can just quickly, right click on the faders and learn CC. Let's see if I forget this quick control. So it looks like if you go into the quick control settings here, you might be able to rename that. But email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de, and I could check it out even more further if you want. Sorry about that. And usually you just kind of right click and click on Learn, and then the quick controls will automatically be captured for the parameters. All right, so we see from Mr. Morpheus, question. Hey, Greg, Happy New Year. Can you please demonstrate how to record one track to another in real time? Thanks in advance. Okay, so let's say I want to take this particular track, and I will, I'll just take the volume down here in this track. So let's say, all right, so I'll just solo this track. So what I could do is send this track to a group. So I'm going to right click on the track, add group, and we'll say add group channel to selected channels. I'm going to make it a stereo group. So it's now being sent to this group, and I'm going to add an audio track. And we're going to set that input to group 1, and we'll make it a stereo track. Add track. We can now arm it for record. And then if I just record, we're now recording that track. And that's how you could just record. So send the track to a group, and then on the audio input, send the input to that particular group track that you had sent out. All right, wonderful to see Benny on the live stream. We hope your daughter had a great 14th birthday party and celebration. All right, so we see from Ace Amadeus, does Steinberg have an editor librarian for Yamaha TX802 module? If not, please recommend one for Cubase 12 Pro Windows 10. Thanks. Yes, I think we had one, SynthWorks for the TX802, but that was 1987, 1988. So I don't think that, they're going to make an editor librarian for a module that's been discontinued for 30 years or so. But you can make device panels where you could kind of create your own editor for that. So check out some of the device panels. But I don't think that anyone's really doing editor librarians anymore. So, all right, wonderful to see Peter from Montreal. and Jan from Cubase Index. And Alexander Plasko just says Sound Diver was a nightmare for me. So there's a reason that we've all kind of migrated to virtual instruments, because dealing with patch management, a lot of hardware was problematic. All right, so we see question from Dallas LaRue. I always start my projects on measure 2, but when I flatten the chain to move a project on the arranger track, it reverts back to measure 1. Can I change that? So maybe what you could do is, instead of starting at measure 2, your project is, what I would try is if you go to the project setup and you open that by hitting Shift S, and you'll see a display bar offset. So try to set that to a 1, and then we could, if it'll ask you if you want to keep the content at its bar positions, we'll say yes. And then what you have is a measure 0. So you could then have everything start at 1. So let me know if you've tried, Dallas, to do the offset by going into project setup and setting your display bar offset there. And let me know if that helps. All right, so we have a question from Mike Weiser. Is there an option to change the hit point line brightness on selected tracks in Cubase 12, not in the edit menu, the actual tracks themselves? All right, so I think the hit points aren't really, so we could kind of see these as kind of, let me just go to a project that has some more transients in it. All right, so we see kind of our hit points kind of laid out for us vertically within the part. So let's see if there's a way. I'm not sure if there's a way to change that, but let's take a look. Let's see if I maybe change the grid lines, if that has an impact. So we can make the grid lines brighter. Yes, I don't know of a way to do that. Let's see if we're in the sample editor and we have the hit points active. We can see that a little brighter within the sample editor, but not necessarily within the events. But, if you needed to see it, you may also, if you go to real time, you could just say create warp markers from the, and that may give you like an additional view that you could, if you switch to a different tool and then switch to kind of your warp tool, that you could kind of toggle back and forth. But since you don't really do editing based on hit points and it's just kind of a visual reference, that's why it's a little, I think that's the thinking why it's a bit kind of subtle with that. It's just kind of more of a visual reference, since you can't edit the hit points here and they're only editable in the sample editor. But I'll pass that along as a feature suggestion. All right. Wonderful to see David M. on the live stream from outside of Liverpool. And we have Robbie Bowling from Dallas, Texas. And yeah, if you are watching live, always, please feel free to introduce yourself. And I'm presenting from outside of Alexandria, Virginia, or in Alexandria, Virginia, in United States, just outside of Washington, D.C. All right, so you see, sometimes when I pull a sample into a project in musical mode, it always changes to the right tempo, but not the right key. And I and I can't even change the key with the transpose option. All right, so sometimes, what you probably need to do is to make sure that when we go to your settings here, there's going to be, let me just find the right. So make sure that you have project root key active. So let's say if I was doing a brand new project. Now, not all samples, let me just change, are going to have like the actual key information included. All the content that comes with Cubase does. So let me just go to restore this to defaults. Okay, so now we're going to make sure that we have the project root key turned on. And then once we go to our project root key, I can say, okay, I am in the key of E. So I will drag a loop over. So I'll start off with maybe a quick drum loop. Find some audio. All right, so say, okay, I'm going to find. Okay, so this is our. Okay, so now let's say I'll start this at the beginning, and now I want to say, okay, I want a bass part. Okay, so, and let's say, okay, I want it. So now when I do this, let's say we listen to it. So now if I change my root key here to G, so now if I wanted to just drop in like, other lines, so let's say while we're here, so I'll just put this into a quick loop. Find something more rhythmic. All right, pick the worst sample of all time to use. All right, All right, so now let's say, okay, I wanted a clavinet. So if I switch this to A, I want it to be in the key of F. But if you don't have the project root key turned on, then all of the content, all the content that we see here will actually be based on, all the included content will have all of the tempo as well as the key information, but you need to activate the project root key, and then everything will follow based on the project root key of the bundled content. All right. So we see a question from Benny. Is it possible to mute a chord track so that no track is controlled by it, but you want to remain, can't find it? So if you have a chord track, we can come over. So let's go ahead and just open one up. So say here's a chord track. So it should be just this little mute icon. So let's say in this case I have like a instance of. We'll just go to Howling Sonic SE, and I'll just load in just a quick. All right, so now when I go to paint in let's say, a chords that I enter in. We'll hear it kind of play back and audition through this particular instrument. But if the chord track is muted that we see here, when we go to change the chords, so let's say if I come over here, we could just say, so you could try to just turn on the mute there. And let's say, like, if I don't have that particular track monitored at this point, we don't hear anything. So, but also, and if you don't see the mute icon there, try to just right click and go to track control settings. And then you may see, if you see the mute button in the left-hand column, and then just kind of move it from the hidden controls to the visible controls. All right, great to see Tim Weinheimer on from Mission Viejo, California. And we have Madge Deepers. Glad you could join us. And we have Bruce from Simi Valley. All right, so we have Patrick who just wanted to show, can you show us how on selected notes picture? All right, so let me just go back. So I was working with this, and I have some of it kind of figured out. Kind of working on a macro for it. But let me just jump back to this example. So, and I kind of just quickly wrote down kind of like a text description of some of them. So one of them was I wanted to select like every other note in like a phrase like this, where, maybe I wanted D, E, G, or, something like that. So if we come over to, and I did this I think I saved it as a logical editor preset. So let's say we want to, All right, so I'll just recreate it from scratch here. All right, so let's say if I wanted to select every, like, D, E, so we'll do D, F, just make sure. So we have, say I want to do D, F, and A, and all these. So what we're going to do is we're going to say we want to select, and we want to say notes, and then we're going to say pitch 1 is going to be equal to, in this case, we're going to say D3. And we want it to be F3 and A3. So I'm going to just come over here. We'll say our pitch is equal to, and pitch is value 1 of a MIDI note message. All right, so we're going to say, so we'll say F3 and A3. All right, so now that we do this, and what I want to do, so if I have this set up, and this is where I had kind of a brain cramp on Tuesday's live stream, we may not see the notes selected. So what we want to do is come over here and place brackets so that we could treat these all kind of as one entity. All right. So now we're going to say, and put or. So now at this point we could say, I want it to, so we're going to choose select, and then we want it to be type is equal to note. And then we could say we want this to be type is equal to note, and we say our pitch is equal to D3, F3, A3, and that will kind of do it for all of the particular notes as they appear. So that was one of the views. another view, and I'm kind of like working on a macro for this to kind of make it a little more streamlined. But let's say if we we wanted to select notes that are G3 and A3 within the particular cycle. Okay, so let's come here, and I'm going to just take my cycle marker here and hit the letter P. All right, and we're going to make sure that this project is activated. So in this case, I think what Patrick wanted to do was to take this particular measure, and let's say we wanted to select G3 and A3, and then to skip this measure and go to the next measure. So if we take this, so I was working on a macro where basically if we have this set to bar and we have a range selection, and I was just working on this particular macro, and I think I may have to switch one area of focus, but so let me come over to the key command so we can take a look at the macro. So here I just set the grid type to bar, and then I nudged the start and end to the right. Let me just add this particular command here. Yeah. All right, so now when I go to run this macro, I'll just hit OK, and I have this kind of set up. So what this will do, what I'm trying to get this figured out is now that I trigger this macro, and I do this, that it will now select, and if I hit the button again, it now selects just like that. So we could have it kind of automatically go to like every other measure. So let me just tweak the macro a little bit here under key commands, but you can see that those particular notes are selected. So I'm just gonna see if we could tweak that particular macro for Patrick. And let me just remove these because it seems like I'm going to make a copy, duplicate this macro. All right, so now I'm going to try to remove this function. And remove this. So now select kind of the area with the range selection tool, and then triggering that macro, we'll just test it here. So in that way you could say like, every other bar, every other third bar, that you could just simply select those particular notes. And then you could do whatever settings that you want. Now, if you wanted this to only, here I've specified 2 pitches, but we could say, so basically this particular logical editor preset is going to look for, those particular notes within the measure. So here it's specified as G3 and A3, but if you didn't want to specify notes, it would select all of the notes. So the logical editors, you want to select notes that are inside the cycle marker for position. And if you want to select specific pitches, you could say, I want it to only be G3 and A3 within the particular cycle mode. So I think play around with that, and I'll see if I can get it totally finalized so that it's only going to like one particular, moving over one measure at a time to do that. So, but that should get you started. All right, wonderful to see Val Lee checking in from Vienna. So we have a question from Mike Weiser. Is there a way to resize the inspector on the left side to make it wider in Cubase 12? I noticed when loading a plugin on insert, the name gets cut off and I can't read some of them. So right now it's kind of a fixed size. But let's say if we have plugins on a particular track, if you can't, I think if you just hover over that, you'll see kind of like the full name of the plugin. So if you have like a plugin that's just like a real long name, if you just kind of hover over it, then you could see the particular name of the plugin. So, but there isn't a way to adjust that to accommodate more. But just hover over and the name will pop up as well. But I'll pass that along as a feature request. All right, so we see from Patrick, question, Greg, if I use more than 7 contact tracks, Cubase taking too much time to open the project, what can be the cause? So it's probably that the contact instruments need that amount of time to load up their samples. So there's not much that Cubase could do if it's, it takes a long time. So sometimes having that's why people will get fast SSD drives to help with that, or more memory in their system. But as Contact is loading up its samples, then it's really up to Contact how fast it loads the samples. All right, so we see Soren from Sweden on. Thanks for joining us, and John Kostikin from Kenosha, Wisconsin, and Uno Memento from Finland, where it's a winter wonderland apparently. All right. All loyal attendees, we appreciate all you guys being on today. All right, we have Gerald Ely checking in from Martinez, California. Thanks for being on. All right, so we see, can you create a wider sound by dragging the amp rack settings on a mono track over to a stereo track? So I think it's going to be the same, but let's go ahead and take a look. All right, so just bear with me. Let's see if we have... All right, so here we have, all right, so let's say I'm going to take this, and let's say I'll take this track and I'm just going to pan it. In the center. All right, so I'm going to add a stereo track. All right, and copy this down to stereo track. And I'm going to just copy over the mix console. Say these plugins. Okay, so let's take these plugins. And let me adjust the levels between the two tracks. Okay, so now this is a stereo track, and this is a mono track. So we'll listen to it. So sounds kind of the same. So let's say. So, oh, sorry. Let me just move this up. So sounds very similar to me, but let me know what you think if it sounds wider to you. All right, so Daddy Danny just says thanks for sharing. All right, so we see a question from Patrick. Is there any plugin for jazz chords inside of Cubase? Like if I want to play every chord as a jazz chord? So, there really isn't like, I mean, chords are chords, and all you would have to do is, let's say, if we're on a particular chord, it's just whatever chord you choose. So it's not like, just give me jazz chords. I mean, you can have more complex chords. So let me just go over here to like a chord track. So, you could choose to take chords. So let's say we have our roads. Now, when I go to a particular track and we go to the chords, we could choose different voicings. So let's say if I wanted to choose like, the chord, or say if we choose the chord track here, we could choose like, between piano and basic. And there's also where you could say, okay, like jazz chords, and often these will just be maybe 5 tones instead. So I will come over, let's say, to our roads. So if I play more complex chords, we can make any of the chords kind of sound more jazzy, but it's not like take an F major chord and make it sound jazzy. It's going to sound very similar on, whatever style of music that you're playing in. So, but you can get to any chords. And so maybe instead of trying to think of it as taking regular chords and making them sound more jazzy, is that you just add jazz, inflections within the chord itself. And that would make it sound more jazz-like. And you could obviously add those inflections within the chord tracks in Cubase. And as Jazz Juice mentioned, there is kind of a quarter plugin that you could use. So if you wanted to, let's say we have our roads, and now there's a MIDI plugin. So we could just say, let's go to our MIDI inserts, and we go to quarter. And if you wanted to just come over here and you could just say, okay. And as you play one note, we could trigger different chords based, just from hitting one particular note. So either way, you should be able to get something to work for you. All right, so we see Kianra Music says, love the live streams and videos. Recently joined Discord server. Great beginner resources. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. If I remember, I think you're from Australia. So if I remember, it was Perth, maybe. I could be mistaken. So, and just a quick comment. If you do learn a new tip or trick, make sure that you hit the thumbs up button. That allows us to continue to do these live streams. We're coming up on 3 years and about 6 weeks since we kind of ramped it up for COVID. All right, great to see Spike Williams checking in from Wales. My chat field just jumped. All right, great to see Gareth on as well. I hope that you can make it back before the end of the live stream. Yeah, be running some errands. All right. All right, so a question from Jovanovic 3D. Is there a way to see audio signal on top of MIDI notes, or how to align the transient in MIDI notes without bounce? Thanks for help. So when we look at MIDI notes themselves, we're not going to see the transient of a particular MIDI note. So when we look at this, we're not going to actually, figure, so we're not going to see, because MIDI themselves, MIDI events themselves don't have transients, So if you wanted to see that, you might have to just come over and just do a render in place. So you can say, okay, I just want to render this particular range, and then we could, at that point, just, see the transients. If you wanted to see kind of more an audio representation. Now, something else that you could do, if you didn't want to do that, is, if you wanted to see maybe just, let's say if I take this particular MIDI event here, and I'm just kind of playing scales here, and let's go to the control room and go to inserts. We can say, okay, let's just go to supervision. And then if you wanted to see kind of like a wave scope of what's going on, we could see that in real time without having to without having to render it as an audio file. But, they're kind of two separate entities. There's a lot of blurring of the lines. But if you wanted to see it without bouncing, then maybe use the supervision plugin, and then you could just choose to use like the wave scope, and that will give you a waveform where you could see that and get a sense of what the waveform would look like without having to bounce. See, Robbie just says he loves Cubase. That's great. Wonderful to see Michael Pierce. All right, we see that Michael Pierce is sending mixes off to KD Tavini, who's a Wavelab user, so Steinberg Arts. It's great. Keep it all in the family. All right, wonderful to see Michael Teams from Weatherford, Texas. Glad you can make it. I think the virtual ice cream will begin. All right, and all right, so we see question, will we ever be able to move with the arrows in the plugin window on the channel? So like, I guess if we're in like an audio track, so let's say if I have, so I think that there's a way, so let's say if we go to, so let's say, let me just see, I'm just going to reread it again. Will we be able to move the arrows in the plugin window on the channel? All right, so let's give this a try. I think we can do it in a MIDI remote. So let's say I want to use this particular button here. All right, so I think we go to selected track, maybe actions. Let me just. So we can say next insert effect. All right, so let's say I want to do that as next insert effect, and this one as, or let me make this previous. And we'll say next insert effect. And then we could say edit plugin for the button next to it. So if I'm here, if I did this right, I will say, let's go to the next insert effect, open, next insert effect, open, next insert effect, open. So let's say I close, and I go back, and I'll again just go to the MIDI remote. Let's go back. I could close, open, go to the previous insert effect, and the previous insert effect. So we can use, once a track is selected in a MIDI remote, we can just, instead of using the arrows, we could just use arrows on a MIDI remote to go to we could open the particular plugin, go to the next plugin, open and close it, next plugin, open and close it, etc. Go back, do the same thing. So let me know if that will help, Valley. So again, you would go to under selected track, insert effects, insert and strip effects, and go to inserts viewer, and then we could just come over here, and I see that there's an activate plugin. I'm going to just all right, so let's say I have this, and let me see if I got that configured correctly. This may help answer a question from last week. Okay, so let's say I have this plugin, select it. We'll see if it's, see, now we could choose to activate. And we had a question last week about bypass and deactivate plugins. So if I come here, and when we bypass a plugin, it's still taking up latency. But now I could just come over here and I hit the down button. And then I could deactivate and activate different plugins also. So check that out. So let me know if that is helpful for you, Valley. So it's not the arrow keys, but you could use, arrow keys on a controller for that. All right, so you see Patrick says, Greg, it's wonderful that you took up seriously and you worked on this, making use Cubase like a pro. It's a wonderful. Thank you so much, Greg. It helped a lot. So I'm just trying to help people create music. So it's a great job. So I'm very lucky to have it. And thanks to everyone for being a part of the community. You see that Michael Teams got snow 2 days ago in Dallas. We haven't had any snow here. My son's been disappointed. So, all right. So we see, Greg, what's the bracket in the logical editor mean? We have 3 brackets. What's each one means? How to use them? So when we want to kind of group different elements together, so we could think of like 3 groupings. So that's what the brackets will allow you to do. So when you go into the logical editor, we could, if we're building a very complex logical editor function, like, when we come here for the select notes, and then if I wanted to, be able to do something like group multiple controllers together as a particular function. I want, so I want to take all the controllers and reduce by 10%, but I don't want to reduce 10% the pitch. So we could kind of have different stages and kind of compartmentalize the different functions. And that's what we could use the brackets for. So you can kind of set an entry and end point, and then kind of set a different bracket, putting it into a different box, and use that for different functions. All right, so we see from Cubase X, howdy, Greg. Thanks for all the wonderful help. So you're welcome. And thanks for being on the live stream today. All right, so we see question, is it possible to time stretch a MIDI performance that wasn't played to a click and make it play in time on any tempo? All right, so I don't think we have to, we can time compress MIDI stuff. So if I wanted to take this MIDI, I could just set on my project window. We could set it to sizing applies time stretch, and I could say make it fit into that amount of space, or make it fit into that amount of space. But I think what you want to do is maybe perhaps more like a tempo detection. So let me open up a project. Okay, so let's say like this project isn't necessarily played with a click. So I'm going to try locking it first and then selecting the MIDI and come over here and do from the project menu. Let's do a tempo detection, analyze. Then let's unlock it. And now let's say I want the tempo to be, instead of like around 63, I want it to be 70 beats a minute. And now that's kind of following whatever tempo. So if I say, okay, let's play it at 120 evenly. Now I want this to be at 80. So then you could take any performance that was playing with varying tempo and have it kind of automatically fit into a particular track. So just that easily. So once you do it, the trick is to lock just lock the track, then do the tempo connection, then unlock the track, and then everything will just kind of be almost like a tempo parasite. It will just follow the tempo and stick right onto it, whatever you do. So let me know if that's helpful. All right, so I have a question. Could you show how to make a simple slide up or down an octave in a sampler track and how to adjust the speed of the slide and glide? Yes, I just did a tutorial video on this. So, but we'll show you here. Let's see if I had the project still open. Don't think so. All right. All right, so let's say I will start off with let's say I have just a sample here, like kind of an 808 bass. All right, and let's say I want to use that as the basis for my sampler track. So I'm going to go to my sampler control, and we're going to drop this in. All right, and I happen to know, so if I take this particular file and let's go to Vary Audio, and we say edit Vary Audio, it will tell us what pitch that sample is. So we can see that the root note there is an E0. So we go to our sampler track. I'm going to set my root note here to E0. All right, so now if I wanted to do different glides, so we could play, and I'll just transpose. Okay, so now that we want to do glides, one of the things you could do, there's pitch bend. So I could just come right over here and say, okay, we want our pitch bend to do an octave. So if I want to. All right, but a lot of people want to do do kind of glides, and all you have to do is under, when you go to, there's a glide parameter right here under the pitch section. So now I'm just going to hit 2 notes. Okay, so let's say I want it to be a long glide. So, and this will often work. So there's finger mode. So once you have finger mode on, if I hit 2 notes and they're separated, there's not going to be a glide. But if I hold down, hit the first note, and then just hold and hit the second note while the first one is playing, so it's a legato. So we could adjust there. So if we wanted that to be faster, I could just adjust my finger speed. So let's say if I want to do a quick drop here. Now we could also place this into monophonic mode. So if I don't want to play chords, when playing chords, we only hear one single note. And you may notice that the sample starts at the beginning of the sample whenever I trigger a different note. So if I come here, but if I wanted that note to kind of continue to play through the sample, all you have to do is just come over here and activate legato mode, and now I could change the pitch while the sample is playing in the middle of the sample without interrupting. So that's how you could set up different glides. So if you just hit like an octave, you could just say. So that's how you could do it within the sampler track to do different glides. So let me know if that's helpful. Okay, reading through comments here. All right, so we have Jeremiah saying hello from Norway. Thanks for joining us. Hope you're doing well. All right, and we have Trond also from Norway. He's had 12 degrees centigrade this week. All right, so we have from Sound Business. Can you give any tips on writing a bass line besides just hitting the root note when a chord is hit? Are there any tips you could give for coming up with a cool bass line? Okay, so I am, many of you know I am a bass player. So one of the things that I would do, let's say if I was doing just a quick project. So one, never do a fill while someone else is doing a fill. So if the singer is singing, don't play a fill. Let the singer have their spot. Let the keyboard player, the guitar player, if they're doing a fill, let them have their spot. So often, we could say, less is more. As a bass player, often what you're doing is, and sometimes, certain people may not get this concept, but, as a bass player, your job is to make other people sound good. So, so it's not necessarily about drawing attention to yourself. A lot of, there's many people that have made a great living playing pentatonic scales. So if you come over here and you just do like a, so if you just do kind of a, so playing kind of those major tonalities, I would say also, if you have a bass line that's kind of going up, instead of going like, if you're going like, and that's the reason why a lot of bass players don't like country music. So instead of like going up consecutively, like we go, so like we go G, A, B, C, go G, B, A, C. So instead of going like two notes, try not to have three notes that go consecutively in the same direction. So it's more interesting to go, instead of just to go, where you go. And I think six, like the interval of six, are really kind of cool. So if you're just kind of like, a lot of people go, and like John McVie of Fleetwood Mac is like a king of using the sixth really well. So he's just always kind of, so everyone always kind of expects the fifth. But if you go, so you could go, but if you use the sixth, it may be a fourth, and kind of do it where it's not like three notes going in the same direction. So you go like, so you have this. This is very cliche, but imagine going. So then you could be a little more interesting, but you don't have to go crazy. It's like, I remember hearing an interview with Don Henley, and he was just like saying, it's like, he's like, I hate drummers that play a drum fill while the singer is singing. It's like, don't do that. Don't be that person. So if there's a little gap where no one is doing a little fill, you can just throw in a little kind of augmentation, but, don't try to draw attention to yourself. And just try to not do the, like, that's a lot more interesting musically and it's kind of more fun to play and will kind of, help develop the part without sounding like a cliche. So hopefully that's helpful. All right, so we see from PZ136 just asking what laptops people are using. I don't need a top-end mobile solution for traveling. In case I get ideas, I have a main DOS and nothing extreme needed. I know a lot of guys like the Asus laptops. A lot of my kind of, people looking for powerful laptop solutions. But I think most laptops today, if you have an SSD, would probably meet your requirements. All right, so a question from Val Lee. In the lower zone, when editing Very Audio, I don't have a mouse, only the tools shown down there. So I can't select single notes anymore. Please help. Okay, so let's take a look. All right, so let's say if we're looking at our lead vocal and we're in Very Audio. All right, so first thing to do, and I'll just kind of zoom in a little bit here. So let's say we have this going on. So, you can select events, but what may be happening is if Very Audio isn't kind of enabled. So let's take a look with the track that doesn't have Very Audio on it. So let me just go to different project quickly. All right, so let's say if I just... Okay, so if we double click here in Very Audio, sometimes you may not be able to see any particular aspects. So let's say if we're here, so you may not see anything, but if Very Audio is turned on, but if it gets turned off, like let's say if I jump up and we activate Very Audio in this screen, with this screen, we can't select notes until the Very Audio is turned on, and then you'll get the hand. So make sure that the Very Audio is activated just by clicking on that particular button, that icon right there. Then you should, you could be able to select notes with the hand tool as opposed to, again, make sure that this is illuminated, that icon in the Very Audio in the inspector. All right, so you just see, is there a way to assign a controller to the speaker assignment output volume pot in the Wavelab 11? So I'm not sure if it's going to be kind of the same as we see in Cubase. We'll take a quick look. All right, so it's going to be this to speaker gain, and let's take a look under preferences. I think it's going to be remote devices. All right. Okay, so let's get a global. Master section. All right, so let's look at speaker gain, see if it shows up. All right, so I don't see it listed here. Seems like it. Yeah, if you want to email me, I could take a look and see if I could get it figured out. But I think it would be under master section. All right, let's see. But I don't see the speaker gain. So, but if you want to email me, I could look at it over the weekend. You could email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. Sorry about that. All right, great to see Troca. All right, question from Patrick. Is there any plugin or MIDI editing functions to make some polyrhythmic effects? I mean, so let's say if I was here and I want to take this Rhodes, we could come over. Let me just. Okay, so let's say I want to take like this chord. One of the things you could do maybe is there's a MIDI echo control. So let's say if I just want to come here, I could do this, but let's say I don't want like the pitch. All right, and so if you say, okay, I want it another MIDI echo, and we can say, okay, I want this to be 0, and I wanted this to be dotted eighth notes. So that way you could have kind of, different MIDI notes that are actually kind of regenerating themselves at different rhythmic values. So maybe play around with that. But you get some really interesting stuff with that, Patrick. Okay, so we see from Jeremiah, can we time stretch a sample to fit the tempo? All right, so let's just... All right, so if we're here, one of the things that you could do is, let's say if my tempo on this particular project, look at it and you say, okay, my tempo is going to be 100 beats a minute. This drum loop isn't playing with the particular tempo. So when I play this, now if the loop itself has like the tempo information embedded in it, and often you'll see it just in the name of the file, we could place this into what we call musical mode. So now I place it into musical mode, it's going to now automatically follow the grid. All right, now if you don't know what the tempo of the loop is, you could also just come right over here and just say sizing applies time stretch, select your sizing mode, and then you could just drag it, and that will time compress it to fit to the particular grid and fit different tempos just like that. So let me know if that's helpful. All right, so we see Troca just says, Greg got a question, but first, thank you so much for trying so hard last week to find my lost question. Yeah, sorry, sometimes questions get lost. All right, and great to see Matt Elliston on. Jeff Sabelski mentions that Beethoven used dominant 7 jazz chords all the time. They weren't jazz chords then. Maybe the jazz guys took it from Beethoven. All right, my chat field jumped. Just find my spot. Okay, so I'm kind of in the ballpark here. Okay, so we see Troca's question. I found an old project and got a groove agent doing a beat, but I don't have MIDI written on the track, nor it seems to have a pattern triggered. How could that be happening? So sometimes if, what happens with Groove Agent, so let's say if I open up Groove Agent here, there is a mode called follow transport. So now when I play, so let's say I turn on Groove Agent now. So it's not like I don't have a pattern that's being triggered. I stop my Cubase transport. I'll just mute this. So maybe the follow transport is turned on. So in this way, like a lot of people will start Groove Agent and just kind of maybe select like a basic pattern to write and compose your song around. So while doing that, maybe, and you may just have it where, okay, I'm going to write with this, and then I go back in and put my variations and fills, and we'll maybe put the MIDI data in. So maybe it's just the follow transport is turned on. So if I come here, and I hit play, it's not going to be on, but the follow transport is enabled. Then when I stop, it will just kind of continue to play in the background, even though there's nothing that's triggering the pattern. It's just playing back the particular pattern right here automatically. So let me know if that's maybe what's going on. Okay, so Madge Deeper's just asking, can anyone recommend a standalone plugin manager that could be run outside of Cubase? So, I always use kind of the built-in VST plugin manager, but I'm not sure if you're doing it for specific other reasons, but here you could make your own plugin collections that work inside of Cubase. So, but maybe other people would be able to help you manage. Okay, Michael Teams wants people to whack the like button. So, all right. So we see from the Heartbreak Time Machine, I learned so much every day of these. So that's hopefully why we do it. So, but thank you. Glad everyone's learning some new tips and tricks. Okay. Okay, so we see Jeff Sabelski says, every time he got shot for using jazz chords, I screamed dominant seventh and augmented ninth partial. Jimmy understood and then turned up the amp. I think it's clever to try sneak in chords and, sneak in complex chords and not make it sound complex. That's complex. All right, so we have Clayton Workman just saying hello from North Carolina. First time that I'm doing your actual live stream. Welcome. We're so glad you can make it. And he usually catches them after. Says he really appreciates the resource. Thanks. I have my brother did his residency and internship in Durham. So my sister-in-law's family is all North Carolina. Been there many times. Thanks for joining us. Glad you can make it live. All right, so we see C notes. Is there any way to make it so that anytime I add a new audio track, MIDI, or instrument track, it gets added to the bottom of existing tracks? Currently, it adds it to the middle, and I have to search. So I think it just goes below the selected track. So if we go to add an audio track here, so I have forget the past track selected, I click add track, it's going to go directly below the selected track. So if I added a sampler track, it's going to go below the selected track. So if you want it to, so if you don't have, so if you have to search for it after, it will add it to the bottom, if the bottom track or if there's no tracks in the project. But when you go to, add a track, again, it's just going to place it directly below the bottom selected track. So if you think about that, then maybe it's so maybe that would be helpful so you don't have to search. You just kind of, and then as you add it, you'll notice that it is also highlighted as soon as you add it, so you could look for the selected tracks. So when we come, so let's say if I add an audio track now, it's going to go directly below the selected track, and it's going to be actively highlighted. So you could always look for it like that. Okay, so we see Valley says, sorry to clarify, moving in a plugin selection window with the arrows. Okay, so let's take a look at that. So let's say if we go to our plugin window here, I'll expand all. So let's say if I'm All right, so we'll expand all here. So you want to be able to navigate down. Let me just check one preference. So there is a preference for maybe under editing. So it looks like, so if, I think, Vali, what you want to do is to be able to, okay, I'm going to add an instrument track and click here and be able to navigate up and down using arrows. Yeah. So I don't know a way of doing that. But you could always just kind of search, and as you type in, it will, update the search field inquiries. So I'll pass that along as a feature request. All right, so we see Patrick Emmanuel asks, Greg, question in general, what do composers feel about AI making music? Have you spoken with any of industry most notable composers, comments on AI making music? What's their thought? So I remember I did have a conversation with Tom Hulkenberg, who's, Junkie XL, and he thought that, and he's always in touch with people who are doing like, not cutting edge, but we'll call it bleeding edge technologies. And I think that there was some kind of doing, some kind of like orchestral mock-ups for scores that he thought were getting better. And he's like, it's not quite for a movie yet, but, it could work for library music, but they're always advancing. So he is one that I've had a discussion with on it. So, he thinks it's not there yet, but he understands that it's progressing quickly. So it'll be interesting to see, how it evolves. Okay, so we have a question from Jose. Says, question, let's say I have stereo overheads track, but left and right are out of phase. Is there a way to align them? All right. So the quickest way would be just to take your tracks and go to Project menu. And at this point, we could say, okay, I want to convert tracks. We'll say multi-channel to mono. And then at this point, you could just, if you wanted to now, just invert the phase of the one particular track. So, and we could just do this directly from the info line. So you could do it just like that. And then if you wanted to combine these tracks back to a stereo file, at that point, you could just, at this point, just go convert tracks and say mono to multi. And then we'll make a stereo track. And then you could flip the phase just kind of like that. Let's see if there's, you might be able to also just go to like an insert effect, let's say on the stereo track. And let me just pop over to, let's see, Studio EQ. And if there's a plugin that did, I'm trying to think of a plugin that does phase inversion. But if there was a plugin that did phase inversion, I'm just blanking on if any of them that come with Cubase do it. I know we could do it as part of the channel strip. But what you could do, if there's a plugin that did phase, you could come over here to the channel strip. And now you could go to routing and choose for that plugin to be in mono. And then if you want to flip the phase, you could just say, okay, I just want it to only be on these particular channels. So you could do that, but you could just very easily take it into 2 stereo files, invert the phase, and then rebounce it. So you could do that in 15 seconds or so. All right. All right, so we just see from Giovanni, how do I create a rap bass? So just probably, using like the sampler track like we were doing just a couple minutes ago. So, and this is a sample that I just got from Cubase. So once you activate it, this would be a very typical bass for, hip hop and rap music. So if you just... and then you would just kind of, hit record. So let's say I'm going to arm this track, and then and then you could just kind of sequence the bass part just like that. All right, wonderful to see Steve McRae from Atlanta joining us. Good to see you, buddy, on the live stream. Hope you're doing well. All right, we have Wilhelm Kampmann from Osnabrück, Germany. I'm sure I pronounced that incorrectly. All right, so we see C Notes just mentioning, wow, I thought tempo detection only worked on audio. Great to know. All right. All right, so we have a question. All right, make sure I didn't miss one. All right, so. Okay, so Michael Teams asks, using an Alesis SR16 drum machine as master clock, but can't get the MIDI into Cubase. He's using Cubase 6.5. I may need to submit this to your email account to explain it better. So the master clock on the Alesis isn't going to be precise enough to actually drive Cubase, but what you want to do is tell the Alesis SR16 to just basically be to respond, to listen to incoming MIDI clock terminology, and this is unfortunate terminology. Maybe like you would set it up to slave to MIDI clock. But let's say you wanted to sync to incoming MIDI clock, and what you need to do is to go to transport, and let's go to your project synchronization setup. And since you have a MIDI cable somewhere that's going from a MIDI interface to the SR16, at that point we want to go to destinations, and you say MIDI clock, and let's say it's going out of your, okay, I have a MIDI cable from my Steinberg UR24C, and at this point, this is what's going out. So now when I enable project synchronization from the transport, I hit play, Cubase will send MIDI clock to the drum machine. It will play, and you take the output cable of the drum machine, the MIDI output, connect that directly to a MIDI input in Cubase, add a MIDI track, not an instrument track, but a MIDI track, set it for the correct MIDI port where that's connected to. Let's say I connected it into, my Steinberg, UR24C, and then hit record. So you need to send MIDI clock, because digital audio is, like 1,000 times more precise than MIDI clock. maybe 2,000 times more precise than MIDI clock. The MIDI clock isn't really suitable to be like, the master in the relationship, isn't it? So that's not going to be the primary clock that drives Cubase. So have Cubase automatically come here, go to your project synchronization setup, and you want to use MIDI clock, not MIDI timecode, but MIDI clock, and tell what port MIDI clock is being sent out to. Take the MIDI out from that device and connect it back into Cubase, add a MIDI track, set that port, and then you could just transfer all the MIDI drum parts directly over. All right, so a question. An idle mixer of mine uses to duplicate a drum stereo room track and pitch shift it 3 semitones down. What's the best way to achieve that inside Cubase? All right, so it's easy enough. So let's come over here. Let's grab this particular project, and I'll revert it. All right, so I want to take maybe my overheads or room mic. Okay, so stereo room tracks. Let's see. Let's see. We have room. So we have overheads here, but we'll give kind of the same vibe. All right, so let's say I'm listening to my drums on this, and we'll just solo the drums. So as we're listening, so I'm going to take my 2 room mic. I'm going to take my overhead tracks here. And let's duplicate the tracks. And then, let me just, I'm going to set these to 0. So I want this. So I'm going to take, these are 2 duplicates. So I'm going to take these 2 tracks, hold down the shift key, and then where you see transpose, just set my transpose amount. So if I want to listen to that in context, so that's the drums are transposed down. So that's original, and now with the transpose down, if we want to listen to that all in context, and if we mute those, and now we'll bring them back in. If we wanted to bring those 2 tracks up in volume, so they're selected here, so I can just activate my Q link. So just to kind of emphasize it some more, we'll just rewind. So just select the tracks, duplicate them, and then select the duplicated events on the project window, and then all you have to do is you'll see transpose. Right here from the info line, drop that down 3 semitones, and you could do that effect in 10 seconds or so. All right. So we have a question. Hi, thanks for your effort. I'm following all sessions. And what do you recommend for beginners of Cubase 12 Pro? It's like a very deep ocean which never ends. When you're starting off, you don't have to know every part of Cubase. Figure out, okay, I want to figure out how to record my microphone for a voice. Just do that. I want to figure out how to get a drum beat going. Work on that. So, think about it in a project, so if you're like a singer-songwriter who plays guitar, okay, think about, okay, what do I need to get this project done for your personal use? So if I'm like, okay, I need to have Drums, okay, so I want to start off with drums, so play around with Groove Agent. Now I want to record bass, so okay, I'm going to maybe record a MIDI bass part. Open up Howley and Sonic SE, find a bass part, record the bass that matches up with the drums. Say, okay, I'm going to record my guitar, and I'm going to record like a MIDI keyboard part, so I'll record the piano part. I'll record the guitar as an audio source. I'm going to record my vocal. And now what I want to do is like where I need to make edits, I'm going to just cut stuff up and move stuff around because, there's no real consequences to doing tremendous amount of editing, and then, okay, once I'm happy, I want to add some effects. I want to mix it. Now I want to export it. You don't have to know everything about the notation editor. You don't have to know every single thing about the drum editor. All those advanced features are available to you when you need them, but you could treat it very simply. Probably the fastest person I've ever seen run Cubase is Stevie Wonder because he just knows keyboard shortcuts and learn keyboard shortcuts. If you find yourself going to a menu constantly in the program, like you say, oh, I go here, and I just, when I go to my edit menu, I see that, oh, if I learn undo, Control Z, that if I could just learn 2 or 3 keyboard shortcuts a day, and every time that you go to a menu or you go into a particular editor, how do I get there? How can I be more efficient? Is there a keyboard shortcut to get there? And incorporate those keyboard shortcuts into your workflow. That will speed up your whole process, and taking advantage of the resources that we have where you could ask any question and maybe you could see answers to questions you don't have yet, but that could spark kind of like, oh, I could apply that to this type of work. But, realize that Cubase is incredibly broad. It's a lifetime of study. I've been running it 32 years and I'm still learning new stuff. But don't be intimidated because it does everything, just try to figure out what your goal is. And it's like learning a musical instrument. You don't pick up a guitar and expect to play like Eddie Van Halen the first day. You have to kind of get your rudiments. You have to kind of get, okay, I have to play a chord. Oh, a power chord. Oh, if I move my finger here, I have a bar chord. Oh, and then if I do this bar chord, it's minor. I do this, it's major. So think of it like learning a musical instrument, and it'll be like the same process. But, take advantage of all the resources. Go to the CubaseIndex.com, check out the tutorial videos, and, come back to the live streams and ask questions. But don't be so intimidated because it does everything. Your car does a lot of things you don't understand, but you can still drive to the grocery store without knowing how everything works. So think of it like that. All right, reading through different questions here. Thanks for all the great questions. If you've learned something new, make sure you do hit the like button. All right, wonderful to see Nick on the live stream from England. All right, and wonderful to see David Reuter and Kristen Precy from Nashville at Big Tent. Glad you guys could make it. All right, we see Jeff Sabelski has to go out for a rehearsal. We're glad he can make it on. Always wonderful to see Jeff. All right, so we have a question from Billy, patron. Is it possible to change the pitch of audio clips in a traditional way so that pitching up shortens the sample and pitching down makes it longer directly on the timeline with the transpose tab? So let's go ahead and just take a file here. So let's listen to our bass part. This will be kind of... All right, so I'm just going to loop this little section here. All right, so you could do it in real time, but that may require you to change the tempo. So there is kind of like very speed recording. So let's say I want to take just this part of the audio. So I'm going to go and select just a range of audio, and let's go to audio to offline, or we'll go to processes, and let's go to pitch shift. So we'll just say, okay, let's go to pitch shift, and I'm just going to all right, so I'm just going to drag this down. So I think now if we listen to this, all right, and I'm just going to do kind of more extreme here. So we'll go a couple more semitones. And I think if we just hit this time correction, let's go ahead and listen to it now. All right, and what I want to do is switch this algorithm to, all right, so let's, so unless you have time correction enabled, so let's just do a little more extreme. So that way, as the pitch gets lower, the sample gets longer. If you enable time correction, then it's going to change the timing, or it's going to change the pitch but keep the same timing. But without time correction checked, so then as the pitch goes higher, then it speeds up. So just go to pitch shift, and I just have it set to envelope here. You could do it other way as well, but then you could just, if you're in envelope, then just make sure time correction isn't checked, and then you should be all set. Okay, you see Michael Pierce he's decided to learn biscuits and gravy as a recipe. So you've been on too many American live streams, Michael Pierce. All right. You'll have to go to Alabama or Georgia. All right, so we have Sako Vace. Hi, Greg. Whenever I open up a project while working on it, randomly one of the instruments changes its pitch half a step up. To reset it, I have to close it down and to reopen it. Why do you think? So I would check just to make sure, and let me just go to project that has some MIDI in it. All right, so when doing this, make sure, like when you look at the MIDI part, select pitch bend and make sure that there's no pitch bend activity, because sometimes, people will, accidentally like go for the mod wheel. And let's say, and they accidentally like record. All right, so if you've recorded pitch bend data, so one of the things you could do, I would just come and let's say if I have this all kind of together in an event, I would look at the part, and you could often see pretty quickly if you go into like the MIDI, into the list editor, and see if there's any pitch bend information. So if there's pitch bend information, that could do kind of what it's doing. Also, when you come to the MIDI event here, and I'm just going to go to the MIDI modifiers here. And so when you select the MIDI track, you'll have a MIDI modifiers, and then you could actually transpose particular tracks. So make sure that this isn't, like, the transpose isn't set to 1. Usually and often when I hear this, not for MIDI, but for audio, and it's like 1 pitch off, it could be like a sample rate issue, but that's not going to really be an issue with MIDI. So make sure you don't have pitch bend in the event, or that the MIDI modifiers isn't set on a particular track. And I think that'll be the culprit, one of those two. All right, so we see from the hitter, that was the best advice I've heard on bass lines. Thanks, Greg. You're welcome. Now everyone's going to write great bass lines and put me out of work as a bass player. So, but hopefully it helps. All right. All right, so we see Harry Olive says, Greg, I recorded a single MIDI track with chords and melodies. Can I harmonically change the MIDI track based on a new chord track? If yes, how to route the chord track to a MIDI track? All right, so let's say I want to take, all right, so we have like a Rhodes part here. So let's say we're going to take this. All right. All right, so now what I want to do is I'm going to just come here and we're going to draw in some chords. All right. All right, so say F. All right, and then the next bar, let's do B flat and F, G minor. See. All right, so we will listen to our All right, so now what we want to do is to tell this particular track, this Rhodes track, and we'll go to the chords, and we'll tell it to follow the chords. So once we do this, we'll see, do you want to synchronize track data with the chord track first? And then we'll say, okay. And now as we listen to it, so that's how we could just kind of take the chord track. So you want to select the track itself, go to the chords inspector tab, and just tell it to follow the chords. And then that MIDI part will kind of dynamically change based on the chords that you type in. So let me know if that's helpful. All right. See Jeff Sabelski's comment, the polka bass lines. So yeah, polka bass lines polka music isn't so interesting for bass players either. So, all right. So we have a question. Hi, Greg. Please demonstrate Beat Designer. Okay. All right, so Beat Designer is a MIDI plugin that's really designed for programming beats. That's kind of its true intention. So I will revert this particular project. All right, so let's say I have this particular drum pattern. We'll go to our MIDI inserts, and as we go to the MIDI inserts, I'll just load up a fresh new instance of Beat Designer. Okay, so now I'm here. I'm just going to put this into a quick loop. So one of the things is once we've kind of extracted the drum map from a particular instrument, we could see our different drum names here. So I'm just going to say, okay, let's put in kick 1. Let's put in snare 1, clap, hi-hat closed. Now let's put in a couple of bongos, some percussion stuff. All right, so we'll say, okay, bongo 1, bongo 2. So we could kind of select all your different sounds. So let's say a hand clap, and let's see if there's like a snap or something. All right. So I wanted to start making a beat. So we have 16 different divisions, and we could make this 32 if you want. You could change that. So let's say, okay, now I want to put this in, and it should be. All right, let me just see if the instrument is playing. I'll just start with a brand new instance of it. Okay, so now I'll just come here. All right, so now let's go ahead and put in and if I wanted to just take this and adjust the velocity. So now I could just kind of take this and program directly inside. Now if I wanted to adjust the velocity, or if we wanted to add swing, so at this point, you could just program your different beats. And if you wanted to do, there's some clever stuff you could do where it's like, okay, I just want it to reverse the beat. And now if I say, okay, I'm at, measure 1, I could come right over here and let's insert the pattern at cursor on the selected track. And at this point, we can just take this particular pattern, copy it out. So we could think of it as just a great drum programming, like a beat making aid with that. And you could trigger different beats from MIDI on it as well. So if you want to trigger different patterns, you could do that via another MIDI track. So all sorts of wonderful stuff you could do with making beats with that. All right, so we have a question from Mike Rivera. How hard is Groove Agent on a laptop? I've been making separate track to process drums, wondering if separate tracks are necessary. Thank you, Greg. Really appreciate you. So I'd say Groove Agent is pretty, it's not intensive. It's a pretty light plug-in, but if you load up, let's say if you're, like most samples are, pretty small, you can load up huge samples into Groove Agent if you want, so if you say, okay, I want a, 192K 32-bit integer sample, that's, when I hit the crash symbol, it's, I'm doing 32 velocity layers and each of the samples last 3 minutes, then that could take a little more. But, for most common uses, it's going to be very easy and friendly to your CPU. All right, so we have Jonathan Carlisle, just checking. It says, hi from Vienna, Austria. I'm a longtime Cubase user from the Atari 1040 STE days. I'm currently running into audio click problems a lot. Is there any advice you could give hardware to sort this out? So, the first thing to always check is just to make sure that while you are playing, the number one answer is always to check your buffer size and increase the buffer size to see if that goes away. So that, and you can think of the smaller buffer, the more responsive your audio interface interacts with Cubase, but the harder it works. If you were to think of an analogy of like a conveyor belt, and like you have all these items coming down a conveyor belt and you had to put them into a box. With a smaller buffer size, we could think, I have to take each unit and put it into one box and pack the box up. But if I had a larger buffer size, I could take 4 units into one box and pack that up. So I have a little bit of, leniency. Like I could speed up on the first one, maybe relax a little bit, and numbers 2 and 3 catch up on and get the 4th one in before. So, and if you had to say, okay, now I'm putting 16 or I'm putting 32, widgets into a box, you have a little more headroom to work with. So we could think of that's kind of what your audio buffers are. So raise the buffers. Now it could also be a particular plugin. So if you go to one way to check to see if it's a plugin, it could be one plugin that could cause the problem. So you could try to go into your mix console and, see if you bypass particular plugins. Now, one of the things that you could do is also just come over here, and if you have more kind of CPU heavy plugins, you could try turning on the constrained delay compensation. Now, sometimes it could not be the buffers, it could not be the plugins, but it could be something that's interrupting the real-time audio performance on your computer. And if you're on Windows, and I don't think you mentioned if you're on Mac or PC, but if you're on Windows, one of the things to check is a utility from resplendence.com. And it's called Latency Mon. And sometimes you may have had like a Windows update, and it may install like the latest drivers for your NVIDIA, designed for enhanced gaming, which is exactly what you don't want for like computer-based audio. So sometimes, what Latency Mon does is it could actually determine kind of if different components in your computer are actually causing interruptions to like ideal audio performance, playback and processing. So check those 3 things out. So try raising the buffer, turning off plugins, and if it's still crackling a lot, check to make sure that you don't have a computer issue. A 4th thing that could cause a lot of crackling is, if the interface is connected to word clock or digital connections, make sure that the digital clock between the units, and you could go to your studio setup, and if you have an external clock, check your clocking source. And it could be like your digital audio clock, like 2 clocks on your audio stream of like maybe like an 8-channel converter going via ADAT light pipe into an ADAT connection on an audio interface, that those two clocks aren't synchronized. So that would be the fourth thing I would look for. So give those different aspects a try. I'm glad that you've been on Cubase since the Atari. I started on a Mega 4 ST myself. See, Jeff Sabelski mentions Bill Wyman was a sixth tone bassist, too simplistic familiarity, then the slightest variations on the fourth bar of a 4-bar phrase. Yeah. You see, Jonathan needs the advice on the audio clicks before buying another Atari ST. So. All right, so you may hear my son, who has a day off from school today. So it sounds like he's having a friend over and they're running around upstairs. So apologize if that's annoying to listen to. All right, so you see, question, is there a way to edit the name on audio tracks in the timeline? It sometimes gets in the way of the waveform and makes it hard to see what's going on. All right, so let's say if you don't want to see like the particular name like we see on this track right here. So I think there's a preference for this. So let's say event display audio. Append clip name to event name. So let's see if I turn that off. See if that does it. Thought that did it. Let me just. Show event names. Okay, let me just put this. Okay, so go to event display and maybe turn off show event names, and then you won't see the event names. So again, editing preferences, event display, show event names. Turn that off, and then those names will disappear. Let me know if that's what the names you were looking to get rid of. All right, we see Vali with the Very Audio question, says he just had to reselect the edit Very Audio. Thanks you. All right, that's great. It's always nice when it's you're one click away from happiness. You see Michael Pierce is off to do his tutoring. All right, so we see question, does Cubase have a feature where it can display the chords playing in real time? So we could do that inside of the editor. So let's say if we come over here, we'll go to this Rhodes. All right, so I'm going to just create my editor, and we'll go to make sure that we have the status line visible. So now I will, as we go to record in, so like even as I'm playing or recording, all right, and all right, let me just extend this over here now. So we can see it kind of in. All right, and I'm going to turn off my chord track. All right, so arm this track for record. Oh, sorry. All right, so now that I have this in record, So I hit record, and now. So we see the current chord display. So you can see my lovely jazz chords. All right. So yeah, you could just, again, in the editor, just come right over here. And you could also just kind of see what chords are actually, you could record the chords directly into, if you have the chord track enabled to record, you can record directly in there. Okay, reading through people. All right, so Patrick asked, Greg, do people like songs with complicated chord nowadays? I see more diatonic chords. If we use non-diatonic, people react differently. Why is that? What you learned about non-diatonic chords? So I don't think that people, I think the average person doesn't really think about the chords when they listen to music. So I'm not sure if that's a factor or not, or people are doing simpler chord progressions. I would say that a lot of, I'm not one to listen to contemporary pop music anymore. I'm beyond that demographic, and, I'm spending more time with my son, so I don't listen to a lot of it. But, it seems like, I saw a study that said, most hit songs now, don't have modulations, which was kind of a big thing to add tension to a song. And they're complaining that, most of the, hit songs now don't modulate. And was that a reason for that? But it seems to me like a lot of songs don't even have different chords during the verse and chorus. It's kind of one chord progression, like a beat that just gets repeated. But again, I'm not proactively listening to, make sure I'm up to a date on what's hip. But I don't think that the average listener, will, if you had, like if Beyonce or Taylor Swift came out with like really a complex chord structure, they would probably still like the song because it's Taylor Swift or Beyonce. Obviously if they try to do something that's completely atonal and 12-tone based, that may sound a little weird. But I don't think that the chord progressions makes a difference to how people react. I think musicians may react when you hear just like a really unexpected, interesting chord, but it may not resonate with a typical audience listener. But I could be wrong. All right, we see Jazz Dude providing different. So he provided the latency mon link. Thank you so much for that, Jazz Dude. All right, sorry, my chat field jumped. All right, try to find my spot as I have lots of questions coming for my future. All right, so you see from Harry Olive, all right, so unfortunately, Media Bay has a bug against the description. When the folder contains the same search term, all the files are not related to the search term are listed. This is very ugly because when searching for samples from Ian, I get all files and folders contained in piano, Brazilian, etc. So I'll take a look at the, when you go to let's say samples and loops. So let's say I just typed in Ian, but let's say, but there might be a Boolean condition for this. So let's say I only want to look for Ian, but in parenthesis. So, but there's still some pianos here. But I know you emailed me kind of about this earlier, but if you want to email me again, I'll search all of the different Boolean conditions. But there are some Boolean conditions. So let me see if I do like around brackets. So, but I know it's kind of covered in the manual, so I'm not sure if you had a chance, Harry, to look at the different Boolean conditions for searches. But I'll see if I can do some more research on it for you. Let's see, Jeff Sabelsky says in PDQ Bach, just talking about PDQ Bach. I always loved especially when I was a kid, loved the Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, kind of called like from like the perspective of the sports broadcasters, saying that the French, as a French horn flubbed his little solo part, that he has a flub average of 3.2 per season. He's going to get traded. So if anyone wants to listen to funny classical music humor, check out the PDQ Bach. It's kind of classic. See, Jay Hatchie says, "Hi, Greg. Keep up the great work. I've just finished clocking all my hardware with USB and MIDI all direct connections. I gained extra MIDI ports by using an old Firewire sound card. It works perfect." So that's great. Okay. All right, so we see from Choka, Greg follow-up. No, the follow transport is off. I'm on Rewire with Reason 6.5. This is LOL, the shame, but I don't think that's it either. It's just a mystery, and the beat is doing fit so well. So, if it's, so I'm not sure, Choka, if it's, so Rewire is, basically synchronizing the two applications. So it could be, if the drums are coming from Groove Agent, it could be like what I described earlier with, either, it might be set to autoplay. But, if it's a Rewire thing, there's not, if it's in Rewire, it's two separate programs that are just synchronized together. So there's nothing really, if you have an instrument that's loaded up to kind of automatically play, which would be kind of a Reason thing and a Reason workflow, then there's a good chance that it's, if it's coming from Reason, there's not much that Cubase can do other than stop synchronizing Reason to play with it. But if it sounds good, man, it's good. All right. All right, we see Sable Winters is on, and maybe her message disappeared. So sorry about that. Maybe there was too many characters. But we're glad you can make it on. We look forward to hearing about your new gadget on Tuesday's Zoom meetup. And once again, on Tuesday's Zoom meetup, I think we'll have Michael Wagner joining us. So I think he's, and as I mentioned before, he's worked with a number of hard rock artists: Metallica, Poison, Skid Row, Alice Cooper, Ozzy Osbourne, well, just that whole era. So I think he sold 100 million records or something of stuff that he's worked on. I think he was an early member of Accept and Dokken. So he'll be our special guest. So, and really wonderful guy, super smart guy. All right, so we see from John Costigan says, "Please excuse repeat." So I'm sorry if I missed it. So we see, is there a way to remove empty VSTi slots? I have dozens made by dissolving an instrument track. Thank you. All right, so let's say we'll take a look at it here. Okay, so I'm going to let's look at I'll just do it on a brand new instance so we can see it. All right, this way it'll be more apparent. Okay, so I'm going to drag a pattern out, and then I'm going to, so we look at our VST rack here. So I drag this pattern out, and now what I want to do is to split each one of the notes. So we'll say dissolve part, we'll separate pitches. And now as we do this, we have a bunch of additional instruments that have been added. So what you could do is just select those. And I think if you remove selected tracks, that all of the instruments that were associated with those will be removed as well. So again, select, and you could kind of tell by the naming often. So if you just kind of hover over, you can see that this indicates the pitch of the particular notes. So again, select each of the ones. So you see the pitch indicated here at the end of the name. Select those. All of our extraneous ones should be removed. But let me see if we have another instrument track below at the end. So let's add, let's say, a retro log. Come over here. So we should have one Groove Agent, one retro log at the end. So select these, right click, remove selected tracks, and then we only have the two that are there. So try deleting the tracks as well and see if that helps. And then you may not have empty tracks there instead of, and maybe what you did was come over here and choose no VST instrument, no VST instrument. So let's see if we do this now, if those would be removed as well. Yeah, so give that a try, John. Let me know if I misunderstood. See, Mike Rivera just says, Greg knows Junkie XL. So, yeah. Super nice guy. Very smart. All right. All right, so we see from Cubase X, thanks for the glide slide in sampler. Is a tutorial you mentioned on the Cubase site. So I'm kind of, what I'm trying to do this year, probably starting in February, is try to do one kind of tutorial a week in addition to the live stream. So I think that it should be posted soon. So I did one on kind of, matching a pre-existing MIDI drum to to a tempo detected audio file. I did one on Sample Glide and one other one, and I should have maybe 3 more done. So I'm trying to try to get several tutorial videos done a week to kind of ramp that up to offer it as an additional resource. So I don't think it's posted yet, but it should be soon. So. See, Troka just says Greg has lo-fi pseudonym doing bangers, but tell no one. So keep it secret. Yeah. All right. So we have a question. Can you? It says, "Hi, Greg, from Riamontas, Leonovicius. Can you please explain why, when I do mix down at 2 tracks, instrument, drum track, and audio bass track, mix down appears in that audio bass track and it's becoming stereo and different tempo?" All right. So let's say if we have, so there's a good chance, let's say if you have 2 tracks, let's see if I could. And also the other tutorial I did was on independent track loops programming for. All right. I think we could maybe do it in. I think we could maybe do it in this to show. All right, so say if I have a bass part. All right, so say I would take my drums and the bass. All right, so let's say this project is at 48K. So often what it sounds like maybe going, the instrument, drum track, and audio bass track mix down appears in that audio bass track and it's becoming stereo and a different tempo. So maybe what's going on is, let's say I do a stereo track. So when you do a bounce down, it's going to, unless you specifically are sending it to a mono track, then it's, what you're hearing is everything is going through the stereo bus. So that's why it's going to generate a stereo track. But maybe the audio was exported at the wrong sample rate. So let's say if I create an audio track to a 44.1 file, and I may have a preference that may kind of prevent that from happening. So right. So now we'll take this and listen to it. So it could be what I would do, and I think I have a preference that automatically corrects the sample rate on importing the files. But go to your pool window and you can hit Control P or Command plus P and see if there are different sample rates for the audio file. So when you come here, you can say, I guess everything's at 44.1. So let me try to export that again. I'll try 48K, but see if there's a sample rate mismatch would be my guess. So we'll come over here to export audio mix down and let's make it 48K. And we'll create an audio track. Yeah, so I have and there's a preference that on importing audio tracks to automatically convert to use the settings. But just check in the pool, and I bet that you'll find that there'll be, like, your mix down, maybe a different sample rate. So check to make sure that the sample rate is consistent with that. All right, so we see, hi Greg, does a file browser doesn't detect MP3 files? Sometimes there's some audio effects in MP3. So let's go ahead and take a look. I'll just do a quick export here as an MP3. All right, so I'll just come right over here. All right, so let's look at my desktop, and we'll see the file is there. Sorry. Okay, so here's our file. It's on the desktop. Let's come over to our media bay. And we'll go to this computer, and we'll have it look on the desktop. All right. Yeah, I can see sometimes where MP3s, because they, let me just. All right, so there's my MP3 directly there that's available right on the desktop for listening. So maybe wherever you have it, maybe in the media bay, just rescan the disk and clear any filters. But you could just see that MP3 file was just automatically put directly on the desktop. So maybe you just have to rescan. Give that a try. Okay. All right, so we see Jose Antonio Gazo. So says he had to go to the phone where his questions answered. So I think we did answer. So, but if you tell me like what your exact question was, I could probably tell you exactly. All right. All right, wonderful to see Mark Rabin from Montana on. Glad you can make it. Hope Stella's doing well. And we see Mark is indicating it's snowing in Montana. Not a big surprise this time of year. All right, so we have Lord Schrader checking in from Essen, Germany. Thanks for being on the live stream today. All right, so we see from Gerald Ely, says, question, I'm using the MIDI echo insert. There's a record to track button. How do you record to track? All right, so let's say I wanted to come... Okay, so let's put our MIDI echo on. Okay, so we're going to enable this little button here. All right, I'll just make sure we don't have any other tracks come in. All right, so now I'm just going to record on a track. So now, even though I'm only playing one single note that's triggering that, because I enabled this particular function, when we go to look at the part, it will now just record the output of the MIDI delay. The MIDI echo plugin will just be recorded. So you can see the note that I played here, and then what was resulting in the MIDI echo being generated. So just hit record, and then otherwise it will just play back the particular notes. So if I didn't have MIDI record on and I had just MIDI notes that were recorded, so let's say I'm here. So now we have just three, like 6 notes here. So let's say, okay, we want to look at these particular notes, and I hear it, so it's being processed in real time through the MIDI echo. So if I select that part and go to my MIDI menu and I say freeze MIDI modifiers, it will then just kind of go down and then generate the MIDI data if you didn't record it. So, but that's how it's recorded, Gerald. See, Mark Rabin's tip, if you don't have good keyboard skills, is from a guitar song, is it's like play the guitar part, do a chord detection, and send it to an instrument in Howling and Sonic SE, and you have an instant produced sound. So, all right. Great to see Best Korean Jesus on. All right. All right, so a question from Alexander says, I'm new to Cubase Pro 12. Some things are not quite working for me. What is the best way to get tech support for these kinds of things? You could always send like a support request form from the Steinberg website, and that should get passed on to your local distributor. Some distributors will have their own support departments, but you could always just simply ask questions in the live chat, or you could send me an email to clubcubase@steinberg.de, and we could go over it on the live stream itself. And also, you could search in the Steinberg.net forums as well. All right, wonderful to see Mark Rabin. Just says, hi, Greg and Jazz. I want to say thanks sincerely. You both are amazing and amazing. So I always feel so lucky to have Jazz Dude doing all of his work that he does to make it such a great community. So it wouldn't be the same without him. All right, so we have from Jose, what is the best algorithm for pitch shifting the 3 semitones? So any of the algorithms will work, great for, 3 semitones is a pretty simple pitch shift, but, So, one of them that, you may, if I had to choose one, if you used a tape algorithm, you realize that as you pitch shift up, and if you change the tempo, that the pitch will change. So just be aware of that. But you can think of like time as being, more rhythmic, drums, and we could think of, pro, so, and we see pitch, we could think of that as like guitars, pianos, voices, and then tape would be like mimicking, slowing down and speeding up a tape machine where the pitch is changed that way. All right, so we have a question. Oftentimes, when I duplicate bass DIs, process them differently, I get into phase issues, which can't be fixed 100% by flipping the phase. It's not 100 degrees. What other alternative is there? Okay, so let's say if we have a bass and, it's slightly out of time, you could just, very easily come over. Let me just jump over here. So let's say we have this bass part and it's duplicated. So I'll just duplicate this particular track here. All right, so what you could do is let's say, it's sounding, it's not 180 degrees out of phase. Come here, right click, and go to, and you could go down to samples for your resolution. Select one of the files, and you'll see a start and end time. And you could just adjust right here at the start point for the selected event down to the sample level. So at this point, you could just move, at the highest resolution. So it's going to be much more accurate than phase. So you get down to 192,000th of a second. So just adjust your start time, and then you should be able to kind of dial that in right there. And you can do it by milliseconds if you have your, division set to milliseconds here. If that's too coarse, then just go to samples, and then you could adjust the timing based just on the actual sampled level. So that way, if we kind of zoom in like a great deal, I could just come right over here and move it at the highest possible resolution to get it aligned. So, all right. Jazz Dude just brings up a great point. By the way, great presets in Beat Designer, always a great start. All right, so we see from Patrick, which ones have best producing and mixing plugins? Did Nuendo have more and better plugins than Cubase? So there are some additional plugins in Nuendo that aren't in Cubase. So, there's going to be, like a randomizer plugin. There's a voice designer where you kind of make stuff, make like a voice sound, very robotic, sound like kind of a sci-fi robot. There's also like a post filter. So there's a couple of additional plugins, but the core plugins are really pretty similar between the two. And now that you mentioned Nuendo, just wanted to bring to everyone's attention, there is a New Year, New Gear promotion going on. So if you wanted to upgrade from your Cubase to Nuendo, it's a wonderful opportunity. There's a discount on that currently. All right, so Nick is has figured out the secret to enlightenment is he says he heard that there is a prize for hitting the like button. And we should all take Nick's advice on winning prizes because he's won prizes in our last 2 giveaways. So he's a man of wisdom. So, all right. So we see from Best Green Jesus, is it possible to undissolve events? Example, Groove Agent to pitch back to a singular event. I've been stacking and gluing. Okay, so let's say if we have a number of different samples. All right, so I'm not sure if it's an event or a part that you're working with. So let's say I'm here. We go to, like, okay, I have a drum loop here. And let's say I take part of a drum loop and I want that on top. And I come and we have a bunch of different samples. So one of the things that you could do is turn this, if you select it, we could turn this into a part. So we go to our audio menu and we'll say events to part. And now when I double click, we could actually kind of edit these together and bring out, so we can enlarge parts. So we have kind of multiple events that we can edit together. So I'm not sure if you're doing parts or not. So if we're doing kind of like our part editor, you can say, I want this here, I want that to start. And we could almost do kind of like a mini little sound design clip here, where we could have our different parts go back and forth. So if it's a part that you've created, where it looks like this and now everything is kind of, and we can think of a part as a container of events. So if you need to turn it back into an event, what you do is go to your audio menu and choose dissolve part. So we'll just make sure it's selected, audio, and we'll see dissolve part. And now that will all be turned back into events. So let me know if that's what you're looking for, Best Green Jesus. All right, so we see question. Don't know if I've asked a question before. Can I set so all inserts becomes mute when I'm not running the project, but am when I am running? So if they're VST3 plugins, so it's not necessarily that they're muted, but if you wanted to stop the signal processing, what you could do is if you go to preferences, so it doesn't actually mute the plugin, but if you wanted the plugin not to do anything, so if we come to preferences to VST and go to plugins, you'll see suspend VST plugins processing when there's no audio signals received. So that way, if the plugin's not processing anything, it's not taking any CPU cycles for it. So maybe that's what you're looking for, but there isn't a way to physically mute the plugin, but that may give you kind of the same thing of what you're looking for. All right. All right, so a question, when render in place, how to have it automatically routed to a certain group track. Don't know if it's possible. So it's not possible, but there is a logical, you could create a logical project logical editor preset. So let's say, I have a group track, and I want to call this group bass. Okay, so I'm going to take this part and let's create a Project Logical Editor preset. So we'll go to Project Logical Set, and you could just, so when we come here, let's go to Project Logical Editor preset. Let's go to Setup. And what I want to do is to say we want to transform. We're going to say our track. And we're going to say, let's see if we can do selected track. So we'll say property is set to track is selected. And under our transform actions, we'll say track operation, connect output, and let's send it to our base group. Okay, so we'll just save this. Okay, so let's go ahead and render this. So let's say I come here and let's do a render in place. All right, and now I'll hit this Project Logical Editor preset, and now you can see that the output routing is changed to the bass group. So you could have presets for this for bass, drums, vox, guitars, keys, synths, strings, woodwinds, whatever you want. So you could save that as a preset. So it's going to be kind of a two-step process, but you could trigger that from a keyboard shortcut or a MIDI remote script. Michael Team just says Barry Modulo, right? Barry Manilow's modulation. So my son likes to point out I taught my son what a modulation in a song was. So every time he hears one, he's like, modulation, modulation. All right, so we have a question. Hello, Greg. How do you create a new preset for the Project Logical Editor? So once you have done the particular settings, like I just created here that we just saw, come right up to the preset, and then you'll see, save user, so once we do this, I haven't changed anything. Let me just add a function here. So now when we go to the top here, you'll see save changes as preset. And then just kind of it'll ask you to type in a name, and then that's how you could save the Project Logical Editor or Logical Editor presets. And that had changed kind of in version 12. We see Troca. This is was a beat designer triggering groove agent. Yeah, that's another thing. So it's a good catch on that. Hopefully my subtle beat designer demonstration triggered that as a thought for you. But yeah, that's a good catch. I should have thought of that. All right. All right. So we see Jeff Sabelski says, Greg, there's a prolific reed maker on YouTube. Just put out a new video demonstrating the prolific command of score with Cubase, including the preferences. That's great. Yeah, send me a link. I'm not sure. I know one oboe reed maker who's a very good guy, attends our live streams. So. You see, Greg, I told him to look you up the NAMM show, so yeah, I should be there in April. All right, so we see from Jeweler to Rocket, can we move the racks on the mixer up and down except making them visible or invisible just by dragging anyway up or down? So let's take a look. So, the racks, if we go into like the racks where we have the routing and inserts and EQ, like these things will be basically fixed because this is how it goes through the signal order. But within the channel strip, we could just come over here and swap and drag and drop within the channel strip. But the other order of racks is fixed because that's how the signal flow, the signal gets sent through the signal. And the channel strip here is different. And this is dynamics. Like say, I want this to come after this particular function. So we could just kind of drag and drop and place our different components just, as we need to. So we could just kind of say, okay, I want this to come before that. And we could just kind of continue to kind of scroll up and change the signal flow like so. All right, you see from Gerald Ely, just kind words, says, Greg, you do great tutorials. Thanks for all the extra work you do. So hopefully it's helpful. I'm sure there's a lot of people that think my tutorials are awful and hate me for it. All right, so we see Benny says, question, what verb do you have on snare in Santa Wedding? All right, so let's take a look at it. This is a project, I think it's something from the live streams it sent me. And he's like, oh, can you make this better? And I just kind of changed a bunch of stuff. And he's like, wow, I wish I could have those drum sounds. Those sound great. I was like, yeah, it's just Groove Agent that comes with Cubase. He's like, oh. All right. So I think I kind of spent an afternoon kind of tweaking the project, and he was like really happy, and then sequenced some bass parts. Let me just revert this as I destroyed it a couple times. Let's take a look at the reverb. All right, so it's good. Yeah, so it's just a built-in reverb, and it's just a built-in reverb in Groove Agent. So yeah, so people spend all sorts of time looking for reverbs, and yeah, so that's just the built-in reverb that comes with Groove Agent. So if I want to just, as we play it here, let's see if there's any other verb that's on there. And also it looks like Roomworks. And just the plate vintage in Roomworks coupled with the built-in reverb. Yeah, so mostly the plate vintage Roomworks. So this is always a great underutilized reverb plugin, so you can listen to that in context with everything else. So kind of a combination of those two. All right, see how we're doing on time. All right, so we'll get to some of the questions that were sent in. But thanks for all the wonderful questions. If you've learned something new, make sure you do hit the like button. And look forward to seeing a lot of new faces on the Tuesday Zoom. And again, will be our special guest, Michael Wagner. So it's kind of a thrill to have Michael on. He sold a lot more records than I have, about 100 million more. So. So we see a question, what studio gear will make producing on Cubase more fun? So, to me, like I treat things kind of very simply, like the thing I use most with Cubase is probably my computer keyboard. So I make sure that my computer keyboard is there, but making sure that you have stuff accessible, it's one thing I remember being in the studio with my friend Fred Corey, and and it was just great because he has mics set up in different areas. So if he has a creative thought, and he's like, oh, I need, I just want to get a percussion part. He has a he has an AKG 414 set up right next to all of his percussion instruments, and he could just go over there. He could grab a guitar. It's connected. So just kind of the ergonomics where maybe you wouldn't try something because you have to pull it out of the case and do stuff like that and then get it tuned up. If you have everything kind of immediately accessible, and that's why so many composers, I think, work with templates. But nothing really kind of comes to mind. Maybe other people could share their experience. I've enjoyed, like I got a Korg Micro or Nano Control 2. I've quite enjoyed that. I like my CC 121. And, being able to kind of custom configure those things is made a great little, workflow improvements. Monitors, headphones, simple things. What do you use a lot? Stream Deck is also a handy thing. See, I think I got your questions, Michael Teams, on the at least about syncing the SR16 drum machine up. All right, so we see a question. Hi, Greg. How do you use the FX modulator to modulate other parts of Cubase? Well, you can think of like the FX modulator is primarily going to be for the particular tracks on, it's not necessarily modulating external processes. So when we come over here, it's because it's doing all the modulation with the internal tools. So, when you come over here, you have the bit crusher, you have the volume, and you have your different envelopes. It's really intended for all these different tools, but you could have up to 6 different modules loaded up. And each of these modules, you could also have a lot of flexibility with triggering and activating sidechain or MIDI inputs. So you could have, some of the modules being sidechained in, but it's not really for, modulating other aspects of the program. It's kind of modulating all the different parts inside of the FX modulator. All right. See, Michael Teams is happy because Tuesday is Zoom day. All right. All right, so we see I've recently been using the chord track, and it's been so helpful with coming up with harmonies quickly. Do you have any other recommendations for other efficient Cubase features for creativity? I think in utilizing the chord track, checking out the, try the chord pads. So, if you're here, you just say, okay, like I have maybe a strings patch. I think I have some strings in here. So let's say, okay, I just want to take like maybe this piano part and just turn this up a bit. So if I'm here, I could take like my piano and strings, and maybe I want to come over to the chord pads, because now you could actually just trigger, the particular tracks right here and be able to, and if you want to play with the chord pads, that's another kind of underutilized thing, and come up with, and you could extract the chords from your chord track and automatically assign the pads from the chord track directly to here. So if you want to just trigger different chords, but there's, so many great things in Cubase for creativity. So, but if you've liked the chord track, and yeah, Jazz Dude just said chord pads as well. All right, so we see, hi guys, I plan to patch Cubase 12 Pro with a digital Yamaha mixer. Any suggestions? Generally, if you let us know which Yamaha mixer, so if it's doing Dante, there's, a wide variety of Yamaha digital mixers. So, it goes from, $200,000 down to, $1,500. So it's, a lot of the mixers may have an ADAT output or an ADAT expansion card, and you could connect ADAT directly to an audio interface that has ADAT. A lot of the Yamaha mixers will have a Dante interface, and you could get a software called Dante Virtual Sound Card for $80, $40, $80, and then you could connect the output from the Yamaha console with Dante to an Ethernet connection on your computer and pass the audio back and forth. Some of the consoles will have a remote control layer. I don't think any of the current ones do. But if you had like an O1V96 or a DM2000, DM1000, those can also function as remote controls for Cubase as well. So, but congratulations on your new mixer, Daniela, and thanks for being on. All right, so we see a question. Is there any possibility for mapping the tab key? So often the tab key is one of those, like we can't really map a lot of the functions like for the Windows control, for the Windows key on Windows PCs, and the tab key is often used so much by the operating system. So there's so many times when the tab key would just take you to different functions of the program. So if you hit tab, it could just take you to the wrong area of focus for the window. And that's why it's often not utilized for mapping for like keyboard shortcuts. But a lot of, you could set these focus zones with other commands. But, imagine every time you run a macro, and if you're here, you're in the wrong focus zone. So that's why it's often kind of avoided. All right. All right, so I see Best Screen Jesus about his should have been more specific. It's for MIDI events being dissolved by pitch in Groove Agent, but I'll see if that works. So if you've done for a MIDI event, what you could do. I'll just take this Groove Agent part here. So let's say I have all of these MIDI events. I will come over here. Let's get a MIDI and dissolve part. So I'm going to separate pitches on this Groove Agent. All right. So let's say now, so I have all of these. So if I copy them on top of each other, so let's say I just do this, and I could move it and hold down my Control or Command key. And let's say these are all different parts. To glue and join all these parts together, again, as one single event, grab the glue gun and hold down the Alt or Option key. And then you could do that a couple times, and that will just glue all the events so that they're now all one. They all reside in one event as opposed to events that are stacked on top of each other. So let me know if that's what you want to do, Best Screen Jesus. All right, so we see Joe K. Why is it that when I solo a folder, not all the tracks inside solo or unsolo? Is this a bug? So I think it could depend on what the initial status of the track was. So let's say if I come over here, I have a folder track set up on this. Okay, so let's say I have my folder tracks set up, and let's say I have these two muted. All right, so now if I mute and if I solo, so you can see that it could depend upon, if you've specifically chosen those tracks to be muted, that when you solo, that mute will still be taken into account, or if you mute, the other tracks will be muted because those tracks were specifically set to mute, and so that's why. And I think if you wanted to clear the mute status, you could just come up here and clear the mute status, and now when you solo, everything will be soloed and everything will be muted. So you just have to clear kind of the mute states. All right, so a question, Greg, could you tell me how to copy the inserts from one channel to another? All right. So let's say I have a number of inserts here. I'll just drag over some track presets. Okay, so I'm going to drag over, let's say, my track presets here. So I'm going to go into like the lower zone mixer, and let's look at the inserts. So I'm just going to come right over here, hold down the Alt or Option key, and just drag it. That will move it. Hang on a second. Let me just make sure I have the right key. Okay, so drag it first, then hold down the Alt or Option key. And then you could just simply, or you don't even hold down the Alt or Option key. Just come and just grab it here. You'll see it kind of turn into like a little plus sign, and then you could just drag just like so. All right, so I know we had a bunch of questions that were sent in. I know we got through some of them already, but let's go through those before we run out of time. Thank you so much for all the wonderful questions from everyone. Hope that everyone has learned a new tip or trick. We see that we're 110 likes, so it's great. Thank you so much. And again, if you learned a new tip or trick, make sure that you do hit the like button. All right. All right. So we have a question. What is the easiest way to set up the Dolby renderer in Cubase 12 Pro? Okay. So we want to first make sure that we have a project that's set up for 48K. So let's say I will just come over here. We'll do new project. Then hang on just 1 second. I have my son knocking on the door. Hang on. All right, sorry about that. All right, so we need to make sure that our project is at 48K. So let's see. I'll just convert a project here quickly. Okay, so you need to be at 48K, and the buffer size for your audio interface needs to be 512. Okay, so I'm going to convert these quickly like we showed before. Okay, so now to get it set up for Dolby Atmos, again, 48K, you want to make sure that your audio interface is set to 512 buffer. All right, so now that we do that, what we want to do, and it's been simplified greatly if you just come over here to ADM authoring for Dolby Atmos, and there's a setup assistant. So what you need to do is we're going to create a renderer for Dolby Atmos, and then we'll create a bed, and we could add and route all the tracks to the bed channel just to kind of get started. So once we do that, we'll now pull up our renderer. And if you're lucky enough to have 714 monitoring, you can do that. But if you're working with it in binaural audio, we could do our monitoring in binaural. And now, as I wanted to take like different tracks here, we could go into our mix console. We could double click, go into the editor. And if I want to move particular elements, like I say, let's take this piano. And if I wanted to move it, if you're listening with headphones, so we can kind of do a surround sound, but we could also adjust the height. And be able to monitor. And then once you're all done, all you have to do to create the ADM is, again, come back here to ADM authoring. And once all your mix decisions are set up, you could say export ADM file. And that's what's going to be used for the film or music project. That way it'll scale all the panning to different monitoring sources. All right, we had a question from Jean-Marie Horvat. How to edit multiple track variations together. Okay, or track versions. All right, so let's say we want to do like multiple track versions. And in this case, what I've done is, and make sure I have it right. And I'm going to revert this. So when we do track versions, and this is a great tool for actually doing like audio tracks where maybe you have different takes and you want those to all be together. So I'm going to set up, and I just basically have where I want to record. I have a Groove Agent here, and what I've done is I've routed it so that we can record. So I've routed the outputs to groups and those groups as inputs so that we could just kind of record straight in. So I'm going to come over here. I have all these tracks record enabled and monitored. So I'm going to synchronize. So let's say I'm going to record this track and I'm going to have it punch out when it gets to the end of 8 measures. So let's say this is our first take. All right, so now let's say I wanted to do a different pattern. So I'm going to select all of my tracks here. And let's do new version. So those old files aren't necessarily erased or deleted. They're still there. But we're doing a new version with all the same routing and same effects. So now we will hit record again. And we're going to record a different pattern. All right, so now we'll do, again, new version. Let's select a different pattern. Record. All right, so let's say I now want to take yet another new version. We'll do our last one here, new version, jump back. All right, so now what I want to do is to be able to switch back and forth to listen to different track versions. So we play and let's say, okay, I want to go to track version 3 for all of them, or track version 2, track version 1. Then I could say, okay, on this one, I want snare coming from track version 4. So now once we have this done, if I wanted to create almost like a comp of our different track versions, what we do at this point, we'll just say, okay, I want to take this. And what we're going to do is say, okay, we'll select all these again. Come over and say, let's do a new version. And then I'm going to just say, okay, let's go to version 4. I want to take the first 2 measures. I'm going to use my range selection tool here. So let's say, okay, I want to take my range for the first 2 measures. and I'm going to copy. And let's go to version 5, and then I paste. So we'll come over here, say let's go to version 3, and I want to take these parts from version 3, copy, go to version 5, paste. Let's go to version 2. So now I will take the end of version 2, and let's select, copy, and go to version 5. Start right here, and we could be precise about it. Paste. So now we listen to it. We're going to have a comp of our different track versions. So if you want to have like bands where like they did 6 takes, you want to take 4 from the bass, take 6 from the drums, you could just assemble multiple track version takes, multiple ones together just like that. All right, so we had some questions I had brain cramps on last meeting. One of them was if we had how to take a shared copy and convert a shared copy into a non-shared copy. So let's show you that real quick. All right, so if I come directly to this event, let's say this MIDI track here. All right, and now I'm going to hold down the Shift key and drag it out to the right. Now, if I make an edit here in this particular one, all the other parts that are shared copies are reflecting that same edit. If I don't want this one to be a shared copy anymore, when we look in the upper right-hand corner, we almost see like an equal sign. That indicates that it's a shared copy. So if I wanted this to be independent, we would go to Edit, to Functions, Convert to Real Copy. And now when I make adjustments on one of the other files, here that is a shared copy, at this point, we can see that this one, which we converted to a real copy, doesn't reflect that anymore. Okay, and we had a question about how to disable particular inserts. And I think the question was more like specifically how to do disable inserts, and as opposed to bypassing them, because bypassing them can still add to the latency. So with this, if you hold down Alt or Option and click on each plugin, then that would bypass it and not add any additional latency. So I don't know of a way to automatically select that, but as we showed earlier, you could also use the particular keyboard shortcut to automatically, or on a MIDI remote, to automatically deactivate the selected plugin. All right, so we just see a question. Is there an easy way to put an automation point at a location on all tracks? This is so when I control the automation and change it for a moment, it will bounce back to the previous location. So if we wanted to do this, the easiest way is just to kind of put that into like a control surface. And if it's in touch, you could just simply, as soon as we go to the touch and you touch the faders, then it would automatically write to that particular point. So, but let's say if I have automation on a particular track, one way of doing this is let's activate this project. And let's say if I wanted to copy automation to different tracks. So let's open up, let's say, our automation panel. So first thing I can do is say, let's show volume automation on all of my tracks. So as I do this, I can now, let's say this is my automation, and I wanted to copy this to all of my tracks. We could just, I'm going to use the selection tool to select, copy, and then just arrow down. And let me just see if I have that particular preference on. But you could just kind of select the, so if I copy that automation, then we could hold down like Alt or Option plus V and keep it at the same location. So every time we come here, we could just enable read. So if you select the particular automation, and you could go through and create a project logical editor preset to, so, if it's just one point, you could just simply kind of place that particular automation. Or if you, another way of doing this is just if you wanted to return to, a particular automation point, is I'll say, let's select all the channels here. So I'm going to select this and hold down the Shift key, and then we'll put it into automation. So I'll just say, let's write the automation, and then just touch, and then that will write the point for you at that particular moment. So all you have to do is just, and then you could write the particular automation point across all tracks, just assign it, link them all together, and then you could just, so again, just come over here, activate QLink, and say, okay, I want it to return to that point in the automation. You could just, at that point, just write in that particular value across all of your tracks. All right, question. Hi, Greg. I ran into something strange this morning on a project. My client wants me to change the tempo by 10 beats per minute on the track. I adjusted the tempo. Track is normal. At the section where the piece that needs to be adjusted, multi-tempos in the overall piece. My two piano MIDI tracks adjusted correctly and snapped to the new grid layout. The string section did not adjust at all. I looked everywhere and could not think of a way to fix it to no avail. I recorded them in Musio section of my template. The Musio engine has been acting a little wonky lately, so I moved the MIDI parts to my BBC SO strings, and it will not adjust to tempo correctly. I'm on a Mac i7 6-core Cubase. It would seem that whatever setting I'm missing is directly associated with the MIDI events and not the track. So it sounds like, we could switch the tracks here just to be in musical mode or linear mode. So click right here and make sure that the tracks themselves are set into musical mode where you see a quarter note, and then they should automatically follow the changes for you. All right, another question. I have a 5.1 setup, but commonly mix in stereo. What's the best way to use the control room to manage this, to use both the 5.1 system and the stereo system, even with them sharing common speakers? Okay, so what I do, and I do this on my personal system as well, is I have a 5.1 and a stereo monitoring setup in my studio. So we go into our audio connections. We go to our studio menu to audio connections, and we can say, okay, we want to go to control room, and I will just remove a particular monitor. So we'll just say, remove this. I want to add, let's say, we'll add a monitor, and then I want this monitor to be configured in 5.1. All right, so now right now when I go to use like maybe the left and right from my stereo speaker to my 5.1, I may come here and I set it and where my stereo speakers are. Let's say if I wanted to switch that, we see that it disappears. Like I can't use the same speaker in two different speaker configurations. So how can we fix that? If you go to Preferences and go to Control Room, and now at this point you could say Exclusive Device Ports for Monitor Channels. Uncheck that, and we'll hit Apply. And now I could just say, okay, I want, my left and right to be utilizing the same speaker connections. And then I could, share speakers across different monitor connections, so I could listen to it in stereo and 5.1 and switch and still have the same speakers. All right, I think that's all of our questions that were sent in. Let me just check. All right, so let's go back to our live questions. All right, thanks for all the wonderful questions. All right, let's go find the questions and get caught up. See how we're doing on time. We got about 5 minutes. We'll see if we get a couple more questions in. All right, so you see, thanks, Greg. Just about our mixdown question. Yes, the problem is different sample rate, but mixdown track still appears on top of bass track, not as separate track. How to mix it down into a separate track. So I'm not sure if you're mixing it down. So if you mix down here, so let's say we go to our export audio mix down, and at that point, if we, after export, you say create audio track. So make sure you're doing that as opposed to a render in place or a bounce selection. But if you choose create audio track, then it's not going to place it on top of an existing track. It'll actually create a new audio track to place it. All right, so question. I always struggle with solo defeat / safe. I want tracks who trigger other tracks to always be playing, but not hear them, even if a mute or solo tracks. What is the correct workflow? So, when you're doing like a solo defeat, realize that, if we're here and we hold down, I think it's with Alt or just press long, that, we could do a solo defeat for that particular function. Now, one thing you may want to experiment with is, instead of using solo and mute, maybe just use the listen bus. So you could have the listen bus that will dim the tracks, but you don't necessarily have to have it dim. So that may be another way that could, so experiment with the listen, and on the bottom here, if you go to the main, set your listen dim to 0. And then you, and that way you could, or set it all the way down. So maybe experiment with the listen mode and see if that makes a difference. All right, so we see from Daniela, she has an old ProMix 1 16-channel mixer. So it's kind of a historic thing. Got it for $50. So I'm not sure if that transmits MIDI from the faders, but it may. I'm not sure if it has digital. It may have a SPDIF output, but I'm not sure if it has ADAT output. So you may be limited to 2 tracks, getting 2 tracks of audio in, or digitally. All right, so we see Greg is Michael Wagner, the guitarist from Munich. So if you look for Michael Wagner, just look for like Wire World Studios. So I think he may have grown up in Munich, and I think he was maybe the original guitarist in Accept. But he's been in the United States for a long time. All right, so we see, Greg, how can I record without latency? Is this depending from the interface? I used the UR22 Mark II. So, it's going to be depending on the interface. So you can have a actual, so one, if you want to record without latency, don't have a lot of plugins on the system, like on the master fader. And then you're going to have a monitor mix knob. And you could blend that between the incoming signal and a DAW. So you could use that. All right, so with that, we're just about out of time, so I'm running just a little bit late, but I want to thank everyone for all the wonderful questions. If you learned something new, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, and we look forward to seeing many new people on Tuesday's live stream. And everyone have a wonderful weekend. Thanks for spending your afternoon, evening, or morning on the live stream, and we'll see everyone on Tuesday. Thank you so much, and goodbye.